Hey guys, welcome back to part 2 of my chat with neurologist and content creator Sid Warrior. In this part, we talk about embracing the beginner's mindset and how we should all kind of chase happiness in life, or rather, what chasing happiness really means, and so much more. And before we head to that, I want to make sure you hit subscribe, smash that bell icon, and then we're going to go straight into this chat on Take a Pause with me, Varun Duggi. Is there a science to motivation?
There is. We have understood at the neurochemical level what is it that what is the driving engine of our behavior.
Hmm.
And there are several driving engines. There's not just one. Because for something as important as action or human behavior, we cannot rely on only one. So there are several engines in the brain. One of them is a fear network. This is one of the most primitive ones. Anything that is about to hurt you or harm you, you are intrinsically motivated to get away from that. The flight fright response.
Hmm.
Uh, Freeze doesn't really work in the long run.
Yeah.
Eventually, you have
Yeah,
to
eventually you get eaten.
either fight, yeah, either fight or fight. Uh, so the other motivators would be something that is driving you towards something,
Hmm.
which is essentially giving you some kind of advantage for your survival.
Hmm.
That could be love, that could be food, that could be security, safety, power. So these are inherent motivators of behavior.
Yeah.
At the neurochemical level, what is very interesting is that there is both short term and long term motivators. So short term is a chase for acute dopamine spikes.
Yeah.
So that is a very powerful thing, but then that does not sustain. And eventually there is tolerance.
Hmm.
So you give somebody sugar, you give like a rat a little bit of sugar, and then you keep on giving it, and after a while it gets used to it.
Hmm.
And so the especially if you're giving it at a very periodic interval, the amount of dopamine spike it gets keeps decreasing, because hey, there's no unexpected nature of it. It's
Yeah.
predictable now. So I don't get as much pleasure out of that same lump of sugar. Whereas if you keep a variable reward, if you give it 2 days and then you don't give it for a week, and then you give it, oh, there's a huge dopamine spike. That is also part of the whole lottery system, right?
Hmm.
People use this all across. You may win. Scratch a card. Maybe you will win.
Yeah. 1 in a million chance you might make it. You make it once. It's also why people say that when you go to a casino, you end up winning in the beginning, but you don't win towards the end because you want that high you got on the first win, and you'll never get that same high at the end of it.
Yeah, right. It's so that itself is a very short term motivator where you're chasing a dopamine spike. What is unfortunate is that these days most addictions work like that.
Hmm.
All addictions work like that. You are getting a short term dopamine spike, and there is a gradual tolerance built up, so you need to get more of that same thing to feel that same amount of pleasure.
Yeah.
The long form of motivation is what is much more sustainable, which is anything that guides you towards well-being.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think the interesting part about that is when you talk about this, and I know there's enough been spoken about this, is that short-term bursts of dopamine and its connection to social media is obviously I think the most spoken about thing
Yeah.
in the world, and the fact that so is social media going to be the cigarettes of our generation or the generation right after us, and all those pieces there. But I feel more than that, it brings me to an interesting point, saying that maybe things that over a period of time give you that level of rush might actually be better for you than short bursts in that sense. And from what you said, that's what I'm inferring. Saying maybe watching a movie isn't that bad a dopamine rush than watching a 60-second reel, maybe. And we've gone to these
Yeah.
short bursts versus the long version. And that's why it's affecting us the way it is.
I have developed a kind of like a theory on
Mm,
this.
mm,
I believe that we are wired to chase happiness, but we are wired to chase happiness by putting in effort. So anything that you have put in effort for is physiological. I don't think it can harm you. Okay, so
Mm,
this is just my own theory that if you are getting that much dopamine, have you put in the effort for that? Have you put
mm,
in the equivalent effort to do that?
mm,
And whenever you suppose you're chasing a meal,
mm.
you are also supposed to work it off
Yeah, true.
in some way or the other. You're supposed to work it off because that's the cycle of energy. You take in something, you work it off in gaining more energy,
Yeah,
and that's fine. What is happening is that we are living in an epidemic of obesity
so
of
true.
everything,
Yeah,
right? Obesity of nutrition, obesity of information, knowledge, access to everything. So we are not working it out, we are not spending it.
yeah.
So I think if you're watching a reel, I don't think there's anything wrong in consuming reels or TikToks or anything. But then one good parameter of health would be that are you using it in your life? Are you
Mm.
writing a blog about it? Are you talking about it? Are you making a video about it? Anything. If you're using it, I think it's fine.
I love the idea of digesting it out or using it because I feel that makes so much sense, right? And it's also, I think, in your head you're telling yourself that you're doing this for some value, and somewhere innately it gives you, like, for instance, I consume a lot of content. That content allows me to create content. I consumed a lot of books, and that allowed me to write a book. So at some point I'm like, all that is worth it because it has led to something tangible in that sense, right? Then I feel in many ways that's the one piece we kind of miss. I feel that oftentimes when we talk about why someone gets motivated or why someone's trying to be productive, etc., you're not talking about in the long term all you're working towards is happiness. You're just trying to find a way to optimize every single aspect of your life through your mind. Say, I just want to be happy. And I, I, I I listened to this podcast called The Happiness Lab that Dr. Laurie Santos does.
Yeah.
I just started to do her Coursera course. I haven't gone beyond module one yet,
Mhm.
because I found it interesting. I'm like, one second, there's a course on happiness. I'd love to kind
Yeah,
of dig
this is the
into it.
one she teaches in Yale, right?
Yeah, the one she teaches in Yale. Yeah,
Yeah, even I took that course.
and I was super intrigued to understand because I find the fact that there are ways for you to study very specific things like this, even though it's a small course, it's a good way for you to understand how your own mind functions.
Yeah.
And I want to flip this around and actually ask you, for someone who knows how all this stuff is wired, how do you deal with it? How do you deal with us dealing with your own motivation? Dealing with you're telling yourself this is my you know all the where the wires are, right? You know what wire is talking to which wire,
Yeah,
from where to where it's going, but you still are human. So
yeah,
how do you deal with
very
that
much so.
balance of like just really taking this is why it's happening, but you are innately human. Your instincts are innately human. How do you deal with that?
Um, the way I think about it is that it's kind of like knowing car mechanics.
Mm,
Even if you know how the engine works, how the brake works, even then, if you go on a road trip, you would still pretty much enjoy yourself or struggle as much as anyone else.
yeah.
It's just that when something has gone wrong, you have a little bit more of an edge in just knowing, okay, this is probably why this is happening.
Mm,
And you know when to call for help a little sooner.
yeah.
You may know that because you have some inside awareness. But other than that, I think you would enjoy the trip and have fun with your friends just like everyone.
I actually want to ask you about why you started sharing content around neuroscience. And I know that initially, because of deep research by Peter, who's silent on this recording, um, that you started off with poetry content and eventually moved to this. At which point did you switch from being just a medical practitioner to being a medical practitioner and also a content creator?
Hmm. I have always loved sharing something that I have thought about or created.
Hmm,
So I grew up in a very musical household. My mom is a music teacher. So
nice.
right from when I was a kid, um, I would perform in my school musical, the dancing, not dancing, like I would be the one who was singing.
Hmm,
I would never be the, I would never, I was never good at dancing, but then uh, I've always enjoyed being on stage.
mm,
And what is interesting to me is that now we are living in a generation where everybody is feeling that.
yeah,
Somehow social media has brought the stage home. Like everybody is on stage all the time. Everybody
yes,
is performing.
yeah,
Uh, I think in my generation, some of us just got a head start. That's all. Because most of my friends are not, in fact, comfortable on stage, and
mm,
it's a useful skill to have. Just being comfortable talking in front of people. I always used to like writing poetry ever since I started reading Enid Blyton books.
mm,
I used to write poems as a kid. When I joined medical college, I started writing medical poems
mm,
because you write whatever is in front of you.
yeah,
Um, and so I started sharing that. YouTube was just, I think I started the channel in 2012. It was inactive for almost 10 years. Once in maybe 5 years, I would put up some poetry video. That's it. Uh, and then this shift to doing content on neuroscience happened very serendipitously. I was once the lockdown happened, I just asked a few students on Twitter that,
mm,
hey, do you want me to take some neurology clinics for you? I know your medical college is shut.
mm,
I'm at home. I'm not particularly busy. Do you want me to take neurology classes for you? And some of them said yes. Almost 120 of them said yes. So I
no,
started taking neurology clinics. Some of them couldn't attend. I remembered that, wait, I have a YouTube channel. Why don't I upload this over there so you can watch it later? And from there started. From my neurology discussion, somebody asked that, oh, while you're talking about Parkinson's disease,
mm,
why don't you tell us a little bit about the mental health problems that Parkinson patients face?
mm,
And from that, I started talking about mental health overall. And from there, started talking about religion and art and psychology. And
yeah.
then, one thing led to another.
I think I remember watching your content first when you did a bunch of stuff with Tanmay. I remember watching that and I'm like, this is so, because there have always been things to science which were taught to us, I would say, in the most boring way possible. If science was taught to us like we are all realizing now, like I'm almost like I should stop talking about my age, telling people I'm almost 40. I am almost 40, but it's like my standard line. Has Varun mentioned his age yet on this piece of content is now going to be a thing. But I just think back on how I learned science. And I think about how we can consume science now. And to understand ourselves, understand the world around us a lot more. I feel we might have had more scientists if we were taught that in a different way. But I guess scientists of tomorrow is learning stuff on YouTube now.
Mm. And why not, right? Because I feel it is so counterproductive to not learn about science.
Yeah,
Human beings are inherently narcissistic. Can we just accept that?
exactly.
we
I
are
agree.
we are
100%.
we are obsessed with ourselves. We want everyone to talk about us. We want everyone to tell us who we are, why we are, how we are. And science is exactly that. Science is basically your story. And
Mm,
biology is especially your story. It is about your body, your brain, your heart.
yeah.
So learning science is actually the most narcissistic thing you can do.
Now, if someone told you that about science, you would study science, not if you were taught the way I think many of us were taught. And what also happened, I feel, because of that is because those were taught to us in this very refined but largely boring systems. Is like, okay, we know enough about it. Let's move ahead. So even if tomorrow somebody asked you about it, you would remember what you learned in maybe school and you would talk about it. And but I feel in today's world, because you're constantly almost on a beginner mode, right? You're like, "Okay, I didn't know anything about this at all. This seems fresh. I want to understand this more. I didn't know anything about that. Um, we're always on this whole beginner's mindset of sorts. And I want to ask you about that because I'm intrigued by the beginner's mindset because it asks your brain almost to forget what it knows and say, start fresh, maybe refine out some of the biases you kind of built into it. Um, how does our mind work when it's trying to switch towards being a beginner again?
Hmm. I first realized that we do this, or the importance of doing this, when I was playing Rummy.
Hmm.
I don't know if you're a card player, but
I
when
have
you
played rummy though. I used to be a teen patti player for the longest time till
oh
at some point it became unhealthy, so I stopped.
right. Yeah, I'm recently on a poker discovery journey myself, but
I
yeah,
haven't
we'll
fallen
talk
down
about
that rabbit hole. I have people have tried to get me into
yeah.
poker. I have played a few times, but I'm one of those people who will try to win once and that's never enough.
Mm.
So I don't know when to stop, and I feel that with cards especially, you need to know when to stop. I remember I first played in college way back in the day, and I'd be this obsessive player constantly wanting to play, and I think at some point I said, "Okay, this is not healthy for me. Let's stop." But I do occasionally, like Diwali, I
Yeah.
enjoy playing cards, and that's, I think I leave it to
Yeah,
that
yeah,
once a
correct.
year.
That's just like traditionally acceptable card playing. Yeah.
Exactly. You can lose and say it's a festival.
Yeah, भगवान के नाम पे ठीक है, it's fine.
Exactly.
So when I started playing rummy, we used to take these long Kerala
Mm,
trips. So we would go by train, and the earlier train trips to Kerala used to be over 36 hours. So we would get in at Bombay, and then 2 days later we would end up in Kerala. So that's where I used to
mm,
play rummy with my whole family, and I understood the importance of. So if you're holding 13 cards and you have to spot patterns between the cards, and you have to arrange the cards in triplets or in sequence, and sometimes you are stuck, and
mm,
you're constantly waiting for that one card, and it really helps to just close the deck and just shuffle it up and then open it, and then you might spot a completely new pattern, and you will find yourself
mm,
rearranging the whole set, putting out two cards that you earlier thought were very important, but now you'll throw it out and now suddenly you win the game, just by
mm.
letting your mind have that little break, and then now you can see the whole picture differently.
That is so interesting. I'm forgetting what wasn't this something which Einstein used to call, if I remember right? It's a way of play, right? You move away from something, you come back to it, you find the solution immediately because you wiping
Yeah,
the blank, wiping your brain blank
yeah,
rather. It kind of goes into that
yeah. It's
space.
like just distracting yourself, because what is very interesting is that pattern recognition is happening despite whatever you're doing. So if you're trying to
Mm,
solve a particular problem and you're too engrossed in it, try to solve a different problem. Go solve a piece of
mm,
Sudoku for 5 minutes, and then
mm,
come back, and you might
yeah.
find that you're because you are carrying your Sudoku pattern recognition here to your original
Mm.
problem, and then you might spot something very different.
Which actually tells me that if as human beings we are only focused on doing one thing in our lives, we might solve less problems than if we did many things and had many interests. Would that be a way to
I
infer
think
what you
so.
just said?
I still believe that you should be good at one thing, but I don't think you
Mm,
can be good at only one thing, because there are different. Every skill set is complemented by other skill sets, right? And
mm,
I remember, especially if you're a gamer, if you're say if you've ever played FIFA or PlayStation, any football game, you
yeah.
know that if you're building a character, you can't just put all your points into just speed or strength. You need everything. You need agility, you need
Mm,
heading, you need dribbling to make a complete footballer. And so you similarly for life, I feel that if I want to be a very very good doctor, I should know a little
mm,
bit of performance poetry. It helps. It helps
yeah.
to know when to take a pause when you're talking to a patient. It helps to know when you can crack a joke. It helps to know when you cannot crack a joke. So just being on stage does help. So I feel that different skills complement each other.
How do you take a pause since you mentioned it in life? Obviously, you're juggling between being a practicing doctor as well as um, being a content creator. How do you take a pause?
Mm. So I take pauses in very small bursts, because I find that I don't really need it. For me, a change
Mm,
acts like a pause. Somehow,
mm,
when I'm in the hospital and then I come back, and I sit with my wife, I talk to her, talk about the day, discuss what's happening. And then when I sit down and start reading about neuroscience, it doesn't feel like work. And then when I've created content or I've streamed at night, and then the next day I say I shoot a podcast, and then I go to work, it doesn't feel like work,
mm,
because it's a change, it's different. And so I feel that even if you're taking a pause, what are you doing? You are just trying to give your brain a rest from whatever it is that you're doing before, and that could mean anything.
True.
So it's yeah, I feel like having a change in itself is a pause.
That is so interesting, and it makes sense, right? Because if you look at it, we're all trying to be, especially we have the ability finally as human beings to be multidimensional. You can kind of go from a varied set of things and have like multi hyphenated, almost like bios of sorts, because you can do multiple things. And when you're actually jumping from the right thing to the right thing, it many ways does give you that sense of, you feel that okay, that something's kind of
Yeah.
become a break. And I've also realized that finding things to do which don't involve too much brain requirement anyway, but are still fulfilling. Like I like to brew my own coffee.
Oh, love.
Like not use a machine as much. Sometimes do manual brewing and stuff like that. I find that to be super like taking a pause, because I'm like, while that process feels longer than what it would take to normally make coffee, there's something nice about it. And you feel like you're doing something, yet you're not really doing something. And that kind of gives me that sense of break. I hope you enjoyed this part of my chat with Siddharth Warrior. There's a ton of stuff to unpack there. There's another part coming, but if you want to catch up on the earlier part, make sure you check it in the channel, as well as listen to the entire audio conversation on your favorite audio streaming app. Don't forget to hit subscribe, smash that bell icon so you can make sure that you don't miss the next part.